All right, and welcome back to Logan Simmons Photography. It's a great pleasure to have you here with me, and if you haven't already, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Hit that subscribe button, or if you're on Facebook, make sure you follow the page, and also hit that like button, because again, it helps us out a lot and shows you like what you're seeing. So today I want to talk about another Topaz Labs product by the name of Adjust AI. And I'm not going to give you too much details up front here, but let's just say it makes adjustments to your image, basic contrast, exposure, and so forth. But there's a few little tricks up its sleeve, and I wanted to see if this is really worth it. So I'm going to open up an image here in Photoshop, and we got this nice, leaves with that little branch there in the background. And Topaz AI, the way the program works, it does have a plugin for Photoshop, has one for Lightroom, or it can be used as a standalone program. So this is an image I've already edited in Adobe Camera Raw. So I'm going to go up to Filter, and we're going to go ahead and run the Adjust AI filter through it here. And this is the screen that's going to pop up initially here. And it does take a moment for it to load because like a lot of the Topaz products, it is using that artificial intelligence supposedly. So it has to process the image there a little bit. About a 12 megapixel image. Just takes a second here on this 2019 MacBook. And the first thing you see here are all of these presets. So you can see I could click all the sorts of things here, and any number of things could happen. It almost looks like an Instagram filter, except a lot more comprehensive there. And I've got all sorts of different things that I could take a look at here. But we're going to look at a few images and see kind of how these things work. So the first thing, let's try, let's imagine if all we wanted to do is work with one of these little presets. So I'm going to go ahead and hit dark mode here. Or dark mood, I guess I should say. And then you'll see this little option up here. And it looks like there's little sliders and adjusters. This allows us to actually edit the filter and play around with it. So I can hit up there, or I can go up here and hit it up here as well. But I'm going to go ahead and hit this. And that's going to bring us into this, it almost looks like a raw processor here. You got your exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, color temperature, and so forth. So I think I'm going to make a couple of adjustments there. We can go ahead and do contrast. We can play around with some highlights, maybe back off of those. And I want to make those blacks a little bit deeper, so I'll go ahead, maybe about right there. There or so. And I think I'm going to go ahead and maybe make that color temperature a little bit warmer, make a little bit more of those oranges and yellows stand out, which there's not very many in the image, but we'll go ahead and do that anyway. And then these sliders down here, these are pretty interesting. So you have your clarity and your detail sliders. You have these in Adobe Camera Raw and Lightroom, but often it's just one slider for each. And you can see here how they've actually gone ahead and actually, had all these different options for it. So let's go ahead and play around with it. If you see micro here, the way I'm understanding it, and I'll go ahead and play around with this just a little bit, is that it's and of course, it's going to make those adjustments and auto update. It's almost like highlight levels. So, we can adjust here the low parts of the images, the shadows, the midtones here, and the highlights. So I'm going to go ahead and play around with that. And basically, it's only going to adjust the clarity or the sharpness of that edges, the contrast of the edges for those particular areas. And I'm able to go ahead and play around with the highlights a little bit there. And you can see up where the highlights it was adjusted. And, for this, I'm going to go to 100% here. And we're going to go over to detail. And you can see how much, with that clarity, it's really boosted things up here. So I can go ahead and say, that small little detail, I want to back off just a little bit. And you can see in those fine details of these, maybe a little bit, that it is making those a little bit less sharp, less detail. But large detail is definitely going to be, is a little bit larger items, if that makes sense. And of course, I can adjust the, if I wanted to, this boost, which is the force of it right there. So I can say, maybe a little bit less there on the boost. And of course, there's sharpening. We can do split toning here. So if we want to make it into a black and white, you can go ahead and do that there and add some shadows, basically some, colors in the shadows, things like that. So, it's kind of a nice little image, but, up to you. It's, it's basically said like it's a very sophisticated Instagram filter. That's the way I look at it. Now, one thing I do want to mention here is this auto adjust AI setting. You can see it's already set to standard. And this is basically, it's taking the filter, but then making adjustments to it the best it sees fit. So right now it's at standard. Now, what's going to happen as soon as I adjust this, it's going to erase our settings. But this is purely for demonstration purposes, so that will be just fine. So I can go ahead and set this to off. And after it finishes processing, presumably this is the default of the preset, that dark mood preset we did when we had it to off. Of course, we've already looked at standard. Now, HDR style is like what it says there. It's going to try and make us look like a high dynamic range imaging with a bunch of details in the highlights and a bunch in the shadows. And as I say, it does take a moment here to process because, again, it is using that artificial intelligence. So we'll just give it a second here and watch it spin. This program doesn't seem to be quite as demanding as some of the other Topaz products, but just bear that in mind. You may have to wait a minute or so for something to process. Let's see what it comes up with. Didn't do a whole lot, to be honest with you. But supposedly what that is supposed to do is make this into kind of an HDR look. So anyway, that's kind of how that turns out there, but I'm going to go ahead and hit cancel. We're going to get out of that. I'm going to go ahead and take a look at another image as well, and we'll kind of play around with some of these other filters. Let's go ahead and open up this river scene right here. And let's go up to filter again, and we'll go into adjust AI and invoke that again from inside Photoshop. And I just want to show you another one of those filters to give you kind of an idea as it loads up here. Okay, so it's got loaded up here. It took about 30 seconds or so. I'm going to go from featured, and I'm going to go over to soft effects. This kind of looks like a soft look to me. And you can see we can actually do a black and white filter in here if we wanted to do that. Again, just like Instagram or on your camera app or something like that. So not that different. In fact, I'm probably going to stick with this black and white soft light and let it process, but you can see all sorts of different other options here. To be honest, I think the color on this image is a little bit off. I may have to fool around with that a little bit more, but all sorts of different options. You can see the preview right there. So up to you whether you think it's something that's kind of cool. Let's go ahead and click on this adjust here. And you know what, maybe a little bit more contrast there. Bring out some of the shadow detail. Now this is kind of fun with the clarity here. It's a little bit soft, but let's say we want a little bit more detail there in the water. It's so nice to have this particular feature. I can go ahead and do the clarity and just have it affect the water in that case and not touch so much the other areas. Maybe I want a little bit in the mid-tones as well, which definitely more of an effect because there's definitely more mid-tones here. But again, it's not touching that flower because that's more of a highlight option there. So again, pretty cool stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and hit cancel there and just have a quick discussion. Now, this all seems very nice. This is not a free program though. So are you just paying to get a bunch of Instagram-like filters? No, you're not. There's actually more to it there. And it took me a moment to realize it here. So I'm going to go ahead and hit open. I actually have the Topaz program open right now. And I can go ahead and open here, or I could drop a file in. And I'm going to go actually open a RAW file because believe it or not, this will open a RAW file. So we'll open a Sony A RAW file here. And it's going to open that image up. And again, just takes a second to process. All right, so process it in. As you can see here, this is literally the raw file. It's flat. It's very soft. It's not super color saturated, not very contrasty. This is basically what a RAW file looks like without any modifications applied. Now, when you open a RAW file in programs, for example, in like Adobe Camera Raw and Adobe Lightroom, they will often apply some presets here to actually, spice it up even before you make edits. Topaz isn't doing that at all here. So just FYI there. And I do want to point out some limitations here. This does not allow us to do any localized corrections like burning a particular area to make it a little bit darker, dodging, making other areas lighter. One thing I'll point out especially here, this was a very small aperture on the camera, and there were some dust spots on the sensor that were highly accentuated. Now normally, Adobe Camera Raw, Lightroom, we could go in there and edit that out, but right now I have no ability to edit that. So we'd have to bring this into another program and actually correct that. But now you see these obviously the presets again, but we don't have to use these. And it took me a second to realize this. I can go over to controls and bypass the presets altogether if I would like to do that. So let's go ahead and do that right now. So I'm gonna go ahead and say, let's go ahead and get some contrast going on here. And we're going to have to do quite a bit because again, it didn't do any corrections for us. So let's go ahead and make this a little bit less blue. I'll go ahead and warm it up. And I'm thinking as well, it looks a little bit green to me. So I want to go ahead and add a little bit of a magenta tint to it to really spice things up. Okay, and let's go ahead and play with that clarity again here. So we'll go ahead and maybe like that micro we did last time, maybe a little bit in the mid-tones there. And I think I'm going to go into 100% and play around with that detail there just a tad. And let's take a look at the small detail option here. And let's see if it affects my flower at all. Yeah, that's interesting right there. You see how it affected just the flower, but like not so much the water up here and sharpened it. That's a pretty nice option to have. In fact, let's go ahead and look at some less detailed areas and see. Yeah, again, it looks, like it wasn't sharpened at all. But of course, we can do that. We can go, medium detail, which I think will have quite a bit of an effect if we start doing that, because there's so much of that in here. Those midtones, okay. And, I could even add grain if I wanted to do that. I don't think I'm going to do that in this case, but I could there. So there we go. Let's go ahead and fit back in view. And, actually, I made those edits. So now I kind of wish I had maybe some different color in there, but let's go ahead and set that back. And, maybe we'll take some saturation out to correct some of those detail increases that we did there. So there you go. Okay, so basically that is Adjust AI. It is a kind of a chameleon of different things here. At first, it feels like it's just a set of filters you can kind of fool around with. We saw that. Some of them are kind of cool, but it depends on your a couple of reasons. Your level of skill, perhaps, in creating those filters on your own, or maybe it's a matter of convenience, you don't have very much time, or maybe you just like working with filters. You have to decide. For me, I'm not super into filters. I prefer to do the edits myself. Now, one thing I will say, though, is when you actually went into the editing in Adjust AI without using a filter, it actually did have some cool little options. I really did enjoy using those special clarity and detail sliders because I had so much more customization compared to the Adobe products. So that is definitely a strength. Probably the way I would use this, to be honest with you, I'd make my edits in, whether that's Lightroom or in my case I use Camera Raw primarily. I'd bring it into Photoshop and then I would enact that filter from Adjust AI inside of Photoshop and maybe make those final clarity and detail adjustments. So kind of a quirky program, but that is what it is. We are going to take a look at another program from Topaz Labs next week, which actually supposedly, anyway, I haven't actually looked at it too much, supposedly has even more customization and maybe is even more like Camera Raw or Lightroom. We'll see. We'll take a look at that next week. But that is Adjust AI for now. So let me know what you think down in the comments. Do you like it? Is it worthwhile? Is it not worthwhile? And again, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel because it helps out a lot. So definitely appreciate you watching and you have a good one. Bye-bye.